We wanted to ask you how you define what boundaries are.
Yeah, it's a question I often get. Definitely, there's so much confusion around how to recognize where our limits are, where's our no, where's our yes. And so, it's a combination of an intuitive feeling we have in our body, but it's also it's a limit that protects our integrity. It protects our emotional integrity, our mental integrity, our physical integrity, and our spiritual integrity. And so what we do to preserve those things is where our boundaries and limits need to be. And what I love to say about boundaries is that they're so evolving as we are, right? If we have a wound or an emotional scarring around something, we're going to be more protective around exposing that or even sharing that with other people. But as we start to feel safer and healed in that particular area, we're going to recognize that, okay, this is an area that I can start to soften this boundary around. So that's a distinction I like to make right away, that they change, they evolve, they're not fixed, and they're very situation and environmentally influenced.
Will you explain the 4 boundary violations that you have spoken about often?
Sure. So the 4 main ones, and this is by the work of Raquel Lerner. I like to give credit to the people that came up with these. She identified that there's 4 different boundaries that we can start to be more aware of so that we can start choosing differently. And so we have our physical boundary, which is, of course, our skin, and that's the most obvious one that we can get. Okay, if someone hits me or touches me inappropriately, I'm likely to just know that this does not feel good and potentially say something. Not to say that, we might still feel uncomfortable, or, of course, in dangerous situations, we might be afraid to speak up in those situations, but we can still more easily know that this is wrong. Right. And so that oftentimes gets really impacted if we were abused or, not really respected for those physical limits as children. And so it's like those red flags start to not work well, and we are not really able to differentiate healthy touch from loving touch.
Yeah.
So that's the one I like to start with, because it's the one that's easiest for people to understand. And then we have emotional boundaries, and emotional boundaries are, our privacy, our emotional expression. And the ways that these get violated are, let's say you're a child and you had a parent that, your parents were going through a divorce, and one parent leaves and the other parent now turns you into a surrogate spouse, and they start venting and oversharing things with you, or you're responsible for now, instead of being taken care of yourself emotionally, you're now regulating your parent emotionally.
Wow, yeah.
And so that's so confusing for a child. No child can tolerate that. It's overwhelming. And it creates it's called a parentified child, where that child then goes into relationships, of course, feeling codependent, taking care of the other person, putting them and their needs above their own, and not recognizing why they feel so angry and resentful and confused. Does that one make sense?
Yeah.
That one resonates. I mean, I just feel like everything, I've read through all of your stuff. I've listened to a lot of your podcasts and whatnot. So I've heard you talk about these, and I want you to finish describing these different boundaries. But that specific one, I'm like being triggered by it, because not necessarily my specific life, but I have like a really close friend who I know is dealing with this boundary right now, like just trying to set it. And it's the biggest struggle, it's just, how do you become, and even setting a boundary feels like the work of a parent in a sense, so that's got to be a really hard one to set.
It's so hard because it's like it becomes so much part of our identity. Like we think this is my role. We're all given different roles as children. It's like, it's not just changing one person's boundary affects everyone in the system. And so if that person's role has been to be the comforter and the emotional regulator of the family, changing that, even intellectually, might seem like the healthy and right thing to do, but it does involve often a lot of grieving and recognition of all those times where their needs were dismissed.
And this is where codependency comes in.
Exactly. Yeah. Where the codependent, habits of putting somebody else's needs ahead of our own, and not even being aware that we're doing it, recognizing that even we can be in the same room as somebody and we're scanning for, okay, how can I take care of this? And instead of even just being able to be in tune with and present with what's happening for yourself. Yeah. And so the other two, we have intellectual boundaries. This is the one that really blew my mind. And I had no idea of this concept. And, in the same way that our emotions need to be validated and honored when we're kids, we also need our, perception and what we're seeing when we're young. What's happening at home? Is it being talked about? Are my parents acknowledging that they're getting divorced? Are they acknowledging that there's drinking, or that mommy is really sick and can't get out of bed? It's not to say that kids are supposed to know all the details. That's, a violation of the emotional boundary. But it's the ability to say, mom and dad are going through a hard time, or mom and mom, or dad and dad. I want to be really inclusive of the different, relationship orientations. It's being able to put the experience that the child is having into context, also appropriate for their development and their age. And so what happens if we don't have anyone validating us, we don't really know how to make sense of our reality, then we are usually drawn to people who are really charismatic, they can be really assertive. They're the ones that make all the choices because we don't know how to do that for us,
Yep.
And it creates a lot of confusion. One of the tools I often give people that really struggle with the intellectual boundaries is journaling, but not like just journaling the day, almost like a journalist, like what you saw, almost like matter of fact.
That you're validating yourself.
Exactly. You're reparenting the part of you that didn't get permission to do that when you were younger, and you can just sit with yourself and validate you. So then when other people do invalidate you, you're more likely to set a boundary. Hey, I get that this might not be how you see things, but this is how I see them, and it's really important for me that you're actually acknowledging and validating.
Yeah. And so is it also not like covering up, not wanting to talk about the divorce, but is it also like the narcissistic abusive parent that tells the child that she's lying when she tells people she's being abused? I don't know if I have noticed that with some parents, a lot of parents that I know that abuse their children, especially in my family, they tend to say that never happened. And I've always been curious if it's because they're blocking it out because they're in denial and they're in shame, or if it's because they're now on meds and it like altered I've never understood it, but that's where I saw like maybe it could affect people too, is when they're told they're a liar when they're talking about their.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And even more damaging that way, when now not only are you seeing something, but
asking if you're
saying
crazy.
it's different. Yeah.
Right.
You can't process it and integrate it. A lot of kids that have had that experience grow up to have high anxiety and just like fear of, being able to just be with their own experiences. Absolutely. What you're saying is very much what gaslighting is,
Yeah.
That didn't happen. That wasn't a big deal. That, why are you making such a big fuss about it? Or even worse, what you said, it didn't happen at all.
Yeah.
So that is very, 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 very deeply confusing. And the ironic thing is we tend to be attracted to the very kinds of people that violate our boundaries.
That's what's so interesting. So that happened as a child, and then I ended up dating someone who was an alcoholic. So he literally wouldn't remember it how it was. So I don't know if he was purposely gaslighting or just didn't remember. And we want to hear about the fourth one, but I'm interested too how people is there a certain thing people can do that makes them recognize that they aren't
crazy, and that this is really someone just gaslighting, you're saying.
Totally. Well, and I think that's where the psychoeducation in the mental health community is so important. When we start to learn, okay, this is healthy and this is actually not healthy, we start to have more of a cognitive awareness. And when we start to feel validated, whether you're working with a coach or a therapist, and you tell your story and they're like, no, this is not okay. Your story is valid. This person may not remember it in the same way that you do, but them approaching you and invalidating your experience is not okay. And this is actually very appropriate for you to say something, for you to set it and see how they respond. If they continue to do what they're doing, then you get to choose if you want to continue a relationship with this person. Because you're right, sometimes people, they bring their own stuff. We all violate boundaries, some people in much more extreme ways, but I believe all of us are violating boundaries unknowingly, constantly. So I think we have a responsibility to speak up, not just for ourselves, but to even give the other person a chance to they're capable of showing up. I would not recommend doing this with someone that is an extreme gaslighter or abusive. That's just not, I would not recommend that.
And I suppose once you're conscious of the boundaries you weren't given as a child, once you're conscious of those, then you're able to recognize them as an adult right away in a relationship. So I guess the number one step is coming face to face with that. What boundaries was I not given as a child?
Yes, and validating your own experience. Because what happens is when we're denied, when we're not validated, we do the same thing to ourselves. It goes out the same way it went in. And so if our reality was denied, we're likely to minimize it ourselves. Oh, it wasn't a big deal. My feelings don't matter. I can get over it. We talk ourselves out of our experience, whereas the work is, no, let me just see how I really feel. Let me just kind of sit with, do I really agree with this person, or am I just doing that because that's what I was forced to do as a child? So giving ourselves permission to slow down and really feel and think about what's actually happening. And this is a hard process. I really want to acknowledge that for you guys.
It's super hard, especially if you've developed a codependency. Then it's like, it's a catch-22 almost.
It really is. And even doing this work for as many years as I have, it's still very hard for me to recognize, when certain boundaries are violated. It takes a lot for me to be able to just speak on that or feel like I can stand up for myself. And, it just happened. Somebody sent me a message on my Instagram and it was a very mean message. And I was like, this is not okay. This is really hard. This is not okay.
Yeah.
And even just being able to say that, even though the part of me is like, oh, they didn't mean it. Their intention was nice. I go through all these things, but my practice is actually speaking the boundary when someone is actually really being mean and being okay if they don't like me,
Yeah.
It's feedback. And if they're not willing to kind of see their harsh and hurtful approach, that's no longer my responsibility. If I continue to be overly nice and overly considerate, that's when I lean into my codependency, which is comfortable for me to go to. Yeah.
All right. So what's that fourth one?
Yeah.
So the fourth one is the spiritual boundaries. And this, it's interesting. I have been seeing a lot of posts on Facebook lately and again, I respect all religions and spiritual beliefs. I'm very, open when it comes to accepting, whatever somebody believes. And yet I think with organized religion, we can oftentimes bypass what somebody's experiencing and try to get them to a higher state of consciousness when they're not ready to go there. That's what a violation of a spiritual boundary is. Let me take this verse out of the Quran or the Bible or or whatever religious or spiritual belief, and let me read this to you. Instead of meeting the person in their pain, in their experience, and validating it, it's using some kind of spiritual lingo. The law of the law of, I'm blanking out, law of attraction. When that came out, everybody was, telling each other,
preaching it.
You manifested this.
Oh, yeah.
How did you make this happen? It's like, that's the last person somebody that's having a mental or emotional breakdown wants to hear or needs to hear for them to know. So think of the spiritual boundary. It's a bypass, and it can also happen in a lot of organizational healing places where it's very mission oriented. They want to get you to transformation in a 3-day workshop, and you're like, I'm not ready to go there yet. Maybe in a couple more days, but it's like this rush to get you to work on and face this vulnerability so that you can go beyond it. But it can often cause us to really shut down internally and actually delay the healing process even more.
Yeah.
Tricky. It's like the person doing healing work has to be really sensitive to the person in front of them, and to really be able to honor their pace and not make it about their own agenda.
Yeah.
And that's where it gets tricky when it comes to group settings. And so that's something,
The difference between healing and fixing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the difference between going to a professional therapist or just reading a book and trying to do it at home with your spouse, right?
Totally.
Probably not the safest setting.
It's hard. I think that a lot of that and this boundary is based in fear, because it's like, especially with organized religion, you're like fearing that they're going to be damned to hell. So you're trying to save them. And then with even the healing, you're like fearing that they're going to be in pain or they're not going to become conscious. So you're trying, so it seems all based in fear in that one.
Totally. And think about it. What you're saying is like, it's basically about me, not about you, but it's like, it's my fear that you're not going to do X, or my fear that you're going to go to hell. And that's actually one of the things that a lot of, spiritual people can do is they instill that terror in a child at an age where they can't even deal with that emotion.
Yeah.
And so they walk around just feeling scared to make a mistake, or they put their parents on such a pedestal because, a parent that is spiritual, but that is not conscious of the mental health realities can maybe Maybe they don't share their vulnerabilities with their kids because they're bypassing their own experience due to their spiritual belief or their conscious faith. And so then the child's like, well, I don't have a reference point. I have to be this godly figure, but I'm in pain. So are constantly feeling shame and terror for just basically being human.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing is that it stems also back to codependency in the fact that the person that's pushing, let's say, spirituality on somebody else wants them to save their soul, whatever it is, I don't know, they're pushing, but wants them to save their soul so that they can still have them in their next life or whatever the belief is. Otherwise, they will be the one in pain. It's not really, it seems it's almost never about, I don't even know a circumstance I can call to mind where it's about someone else genuinely. Like it always is some selfish nature, it seems. Does that feel accurate at all?
Well, I think when parents can introduce spirituality and a religion in a way that's more of a guided approach and answers their kids' questions, but is not doing it in a forceful way or in a punishing way, then that child has, we want to guide our kids to believe in similar things, especially if we think that they're good for us. I think that's understandable completely. But I think we get into trouble, like you said, when we're doing it and we have like these huge agendas that a child cannot possibly fulfill. And it's extremely damaging for a child to be responsible for something like that. And there's so many extremes in different religions, but I do think that this is coming much more to surface, the lack of that mental health awareness in a lot of major religions. I think that's coming out more and more.
Yeah.
So you guys brought up, or one of you two brought up, that we're often attracted to whatever it is, the boundary that we're having issues setting. We're usually attracted to the person that kind of
probably feels safer.
Yeah, the repeat of the wound, I guess it is, from a younger childhood trauma or whatever it was that brought this boundary or lack of boundary, I guess, into our life. Is that the case? How do I want to formulate this question? Do we seek out a way to heal old wounds through our relationships with other people, and how do boundaries play into that?
Beautiful question. And the short answer is yes. We unconsciously attract familiar. And part of it is exactly what you said, Mercedes. It's like we're not aware that we're trying to heal it, but we're trying to close the cycle in a healed way, And so our brains are very patterned, and they're extremely patterned in the ways that we've been wired and all the memories and the kinds of experiences we've had. Here's a person that's very similar to mom or dad or to my siblings, and so I'm going to be naturally drawn to somebody that feels so familiar and cozy and homey and all these things. And so, yes. And the beautiful news is that doesn't always end up in a bad way. I've seen many couples pair up with perfectly matching wounds. This person's wound, is a perfect mirror for this person's wound, and they trigger the shenanigans out of each other. And we don't want them to stay there. It's okay for people to trigger each other's stuff, but they have to develop a way to stand up for themselves, stand up for their needs, and to communicate what's important for them, and also take in consideration their partner's vulnerabilities and sensitivities too. So sometimes there can, be something really healing that can come out of a situation that starts off in a more of a not so healthy way. But if both partners are committed to doing the work, and I like to talk with my hands. They're doing their own talking right now. Okay, they're but not always. We hear this concept of trauma bonding, and I don't do too in-depth work around that. But of course, if the wounds are so deep and they're touching each other in ways that keep both partners dysregulated and it's just so toxic, that might not be, a situation we want to stay in. But every partner is going to trigger us. And is this person responding to, the boundaries that are important to me? Are they willing to do the work? Am I willing to respond to the boundaries that are important to them? I often share the example, me and my partner, my emotional boundaries have been a really important part of my journey, and his intellectual boundaries have been a really huge part of his. And in the beginning of our relationship, when I was so committed to being right at all costs, I would be like, my version is the right version, and it didn't work for him. And, he didn't say something for a long time because he wasn't even aware that he felt violated. And so when he finally had the courage to tell me, I was like, I'm doing this to my partner, and this is not okay. And I still do it without realizing when I'm in a trigger state. And my work is recognizing that, okay, I just stepped on the line, call myself out, do the repair so that he feels validated, because that's so important, but that's a choice that we make. Do we want to be a partner that's going to be an advocate for our partner's healing, or are we, just going to continue to bypass their needs and not make their boundaries important to us?
Yeah.
It's such a powerful tool to be able to recognize it first off, and then see when it comes up every time, and draw yourself out of your ego head, or draw yourself into a place where you can be emotionally sober enough to act from your heart instead of your head, I guess, in that case. Totally. And we're going to ask you about how do we set these boundaries, and I know that is trickier probably than it even sounds, but I wanted to ask you, just because right now we're studying up for a guest of ours that's gonna, we talk a lot about open relationships and all types of different relationship styles. Well, she is in an open relationship and has a child, and so a young child now. But we were talking about boundaries earlier, and it being like, where do you cross the line with kids and telling them too much and that type of thing? But when it comes to something like an open relationship, how do you navigate that without crossing boundaries with a child?
I think that giving children a general theme is usually where we want to kind of stay. Again, depending on their age, it's really, really different. But, for a 4-year-old child, where we can, maybe let me stick to a better age, maybe like a 6-year-old child, letting them know, mommy and daddy maybe have, or mommy and mommy, whatever the dynamic is, have, a different kind of relationship dynamic than maybe other couples that you see around. And we just want you to know that that's okay. And if you ever have any questions, you can always come to us. And, I think that there's fluidity there, but I think obviously the details of what happens in that relationship does not necessarily need to be shared, I wouldn't, share what's happening sexually, or, or even maybe, recognizing that kids at a certain young age can't even handle a lot of sexual content. That's overwhelming for their system. They can't. And so I think that them witnessing the couple, even just in having a healthy relationship, is so powerful in itself, being able to have, having the model and being able to treat each other with respect and honor, that's huge. But also, what are some of the concerns that my children might think about at this age? What are some of the objections that they might, feel, or concerns, and how to address those in a general way? I don't work too in depth with parenting stuff, but I do know that we have to be very careful with unloading too many of those details. And, I highly recommend working with someone when you're in that situation to kind of help you recognize, okay, for this age, at what age can I start introducing sex, or what age can I start, answering questions in a little bit more in depth? But does that help a little bit?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So Mercedes said our next question, how do we set boundaries?
So how do we set boundaries? The first piece is, like you mentioned, Jade, it's the recognition piece, it's the validating ourselves, because we're not going to do a good job of setting the boundary when it comes out in an aggressive and harsh way, which a lot of times it does when we've been so constipated and not expressive of our limits. It can come out in like a volcanic way.
Yeah.
And so spending some time recognizing, that's why I love maps. I work a lot with attachment styles. I work a lot with the boundaries map. And I don't like to use them in a fixed, rigid way. I really like to use them as a tool, again, psychoeducation, to really help us understand what are the specific boundaries that speak to me in particular, and own that and validate that for myself. And then start bringing them into the relationship. If it's an emotional boundary, I'll give you a practical example. If somebody is not really, let's say, Jade, you're feeling really sad and you're sharing that you feel sad with your partner, and your partner's like, oh, it's not a big deal. We've talked about this. And so you standing up for yourself, for your emotions, would look like, I get that this might be hard for you, but I'm having an emotional experience around this. And it's really important for me that you're able to honor and validate that in order for me to feel close to you. And so I really, especially when it comes to intimate relationships, which is what I tend to, focus on, I like to be inclusive in the way the boundary is delivered. How is a boundary going to serve this person so it doesn't always feel like I'm just saying no? This is what I need, and this is what is going to help me with you. It's going to help me feel closer with you. It's going to help me feel more connected and seen and safe. And of course, if the person responds harshly to that, then we can, crank it up and be a little bit firmer. I've expressed my boundary. I don't know what's getting in the way of you hearing it, but this is what I need. And if you need to take some time, we can cool off, but this is important. And so being really firm and honoring that container that's around you, that emotional, the physical, all of that we have to be advocates for. in order for other people to really value that in ourselves as well.
Yeah, and I heard you talk about kind of, I guess the way I received it was planting a seed with the partner too. Like it doesn't have to be something you are pushing so firmly on them in that moment, but you mention it, you allow it to resonate and sit in, like this is something that's really important. You use the words that are, critical in getting the point across that this is really important to you, and then allow it to kind of rest with them for a while.
Yes, that's huge, because I know for me in the past, I've tried to drill it in and it doesn't work, First of all, they're gonna if they're gonna disconnect after 3 sentences, if not less, But just being able to recognize, okay, I've said what I need to say. Let me back off now and let me observe. Let me see, is there any effort being made? Are they trying? Or is there an openness? Maybe, your partner's like, I don't really see what you're pointing at. Let's say you're like, when we're in public together, you talk over me and I really don't like that. That does not feel good for me. I'm not necessarily saying, hey, this is a boundary that I have. If anything, I actually suggest for people to not use the word boundaries, because it can be confusing and people, what the hell is this person talking about, right? Just in your language and in your energetic expression, you're creating a boundary statement. And so when you do this, when you talk over me, I feel really uncomfortable. I really need you to let me have space to speak when we're out. And then if your partner is still doing it over and over again, because their brain is really patterned, they might not even be conscious of this, you can absolutely, negotiate a way to do that in places where you can actually let them know, or have a tap on their knee, or have some kind of communication. When me and my partner are out in public places, I have to leave by a certain amount of time or I'll get overwhelmed. But the poor guy is having such a great time, he doesn't want to leave, He's like, oh, I just got here. I want to enjoy and connect with people. But we've had to negotiate ways where I still need to, I'm leaning into more of my discomfort and he's leaning into his discomfort. And so now I just make a little, I can't even talk, overwhelmed, it's like, that's my limit. I can't go beyond this. If he doesn't come with me, I leave.
Yeah.
I have to leave. It's not even, I'm not doing it as a punishment. It's like, I have to take care of myself.
Yeah.
And he does. He gets this, but it's taken us a long time to figure out. And, I think a lot of times people assume that just because I've expressed the boundary that, okay, why my partner's not getting it? They must not love me. They must not respect me. No, sometimes it's just, we need more time. Our brains are not really comprehending what the need exactly is. And are they open? Are they receptive? Are they listening? Are they making effort to try to understand this? Or is where I try to.
So how about if they're not? Like, how about if it's not a loving relationship? Not that. So for instance, with me and my mother, or me and my children's father, they constantly overstep boundaries and I get extremely triggered, because to me, it's the same, being raised and then being with this man for a certain amount of time. I get triggered the same exact way, and it steals from my peace, but it also makes me react to them in a way that I don't want to. So if it's a situation where the other person is not caring about the boundaries and they're not open to it, but you still need these people in your life, for, they're either family or your children's father or whichever situation, how would you set a boundary in that circumstance? And how would you all try to keep yourself from being so triggered so that you're not stepping into your ego and making it, way worse?
Yeah.
It's hard. I mean, I get this question so much, particularly with family dynamics, parents that are older, that they're like, what the hell is a boundary? Like, I get to come in your space whenever I feel like it. I'm your parent. It's like, you should love me, loyalty.
Boundary sounds like rule. Yeah.
It does. And there's like, they don't understand the concept of that. And, there's no right or wrong way to deal with this. I mean, every family and system has their way of dealing with this. But I think if we want to do something different, the way to that would be to instill healthy consequences, and not the ultimatum, like you're saying, but really, what is something that I can instill that will take care of me, so I don't go to that extreme place, but that I can still preserve a relationship if I want to. If I want to keep a relationship with this person, or my, whoever this person is, how can I maintain it in a way where I'm not constantly feeling like this is what's happening? And sometimes, with clients, I've recommended, maybe you only see your parent in a group setting. Maybe you don't see them alone. So it kind of diffuses the energy. And I would encourage, anyone to speak the limit first. I know that I brought this to you a lot. I know that I don't believe that you're doing this maliciously. Again, some people are, but if you don't believe that, it's important to speak to that. However, I feel really bad when this happens. And if this continues, I'm going to have to do X. And that's up to the person to really decide what that's going to look like, but it's essential to hold, firmly to that limit so that people, really take us seriously. And it's the hardest with family. It's the hardest. I think even more than intimate relationships, because families the system has been rooted and implemented for years and years and years, and changing our role in that system forces everybody to change, and people don't want to change.
Yeah. Do you see women lacking boundaries more than men?
No, actually, I see that men, we live in a time, I think, especially within the spiritual community right now, I notice that men are encouraged to be in their masculine and take on the woman's emotion and just stand there and be this rock. And I think there's a lot of emotional abuse happening with men, actually, and women are entitled to being angry and frustrated and all these things. That's valid. And yet I think that sometimes, because men have so much guilt and want to be good and repair so much of the damage that has taken place historically with women, they'll actually just kind of allow themselves to take on emotional abuse. And they don't set boundaries because they don't feel like they have the permission to do it. They feel like now they're going to be weak, or other men are, holding this masculine, almost godlike entity, which is so not realistic. It's okay. And what I often coach the men I work with is, redirect your partner. If they're in an emotional expression, say something. I want you to express yourself. Your feelings are so important to me. Just don't criticize me. Or please just do it in a way so I can stay present and so I can hear you. And I can't tell you how many women appreciate that.
Yeah.
They're so turned on by that.
Right. Setting that precedence is really, really the masculinity that we're probably begging for, It actually makes me think of this, for some reason, the visual of like a big Siberian husky dog and a little Chihuahua dog. And the little Chihuahua is always bossing the husky around and jumping all over him and totally crossing all the boundaries. And the husky's like, I see you, you're ridiculous, but yes. I love you.
And I don't think any of us want to act out like that, I don't.
Right.
I don't. I mean, I know when I've responded in extreme ways with my partner, it's been really helpful when he's set a boundary in the middle of a conflict, but respectfully, hey, not meeting me in my own crazy, but just really speaking to the limit so that the container of what needs to come up actually is more beneficial to the relationship.
Yeah.
There's so much work to be done, I feel like, in the realm of navigating the ego in between how you perceive when someone else is acting from something that's for themselves or acting at you, like doing something to you. And I think that we think most of the time, of course, we all think we're the center of our own universe, and to some degree we are. And so we think that, everything is happening at us and to us, and we're being, pointed at and blamed at or whatever. But if we can kind of readjust that perspective so that to remember that every time we act at something, it's actually us acting from a place of our own, domestications, our own traumas. And if we can do that, then we can realize that anytime someone else feels like they are triggering us, it's coming from something going on in them and not going on in us. There's vindictive, vengeful things that I'm sure happen, and that's probably a lot more, that's really obvious when that's happening. But I think otherwise, for the most part, it feels like we're all just kind of reacting from our own domestications and traumas.
Absolutely. And so much of our brains, we go into flight, fight, or freeze, and it's not so much the details of what's happening, but it's just that intense fear is overwhelming. That's why I love, Gottman Institute. He's a huge distant mentor, a mentor that he doesn't know he's my mentor. He's a mentor in this work, and his work along with his wife, Julie Gottman, they really advocate for that break, that 20-minute break when you're in that, you're the part of your brain that has access to reason and healthy logic is gone.
Yeah.
So trying to solve an issue or create some kind of understanding in that place is unlikely to happen. That's why if you can start to recognize that a boundary is about to be crossed, if you can call it out sooner, you might be able to stay engaged in the conflict. But if you've already gone beyond that point, you got to take that break and just allow yourself space to de-escalate.
Yeah, that makes me think about hormones and chemicals, and these things. When I think that's a huge part of this too, is just starting to understand your body more and the physiology of what's going on. And when you feel the emotion come up, that you're triggering these chemicals to come up, which means you have to move them through your body before you can react from an emotionally sober place. So that's
100%.
magic trick there.
It is. And if we can even just speak a tiny little bit to our partner while we're triggered, that can be huge. Like I get that you're, I'm in a shitty, I'm having an experience and I love you, I care about you. Just like if we can speak in a simple, small way, a way that we're also taking into account our partner is there, our partner's presence, they're still having, and to witness what they're experiencing, then we start to move more towards a secure, functioning, and collaborative approach. I think that's, what has been one of the biggest realizations in, doing attachment theory work, which I know we didn't get into on this call, but, for people that are aware of this, some of us, depending on how we grew up, it forced us to be really self-focused and not so much other focused. So we tend to, if we're more anxious, we're so afraid of not getting connection that we'll cling and, we'll just kind of approach our partner in really intense ways that pushes them away. If we're more avoidant, we'll shut down and we'll just kind of protect ourselves, but then we'll end up leaving our partner out in the cold. So it's like the way to secure functioning is to be able to recognize, those harmful behaviors in relationships and start to incorporate our partner in our experience, bringing them in, being sensitive to how we're likely affecting them when we're behaving in those unhealthy ways.
Why do we sometimes not set boundaries? Is it because we're afraid of disconnection or conflict, or is it just because they've been violated throughout our childhood and we just don't know how, do you think?
I think it's everything that you just said, all of the above. I think, we all want to feel accepted and we all want to fit in. Nobody likes feeling like they're rocking the boat. But if you grow up in an environment where your boundaries were deeply violated, you likely don't know that they're being violated. That's why we're drawn to people that are so similar. And even though on some level we know that something's funky, but we're still sticking around. And so it's hard. It's like those red flag alert systems, they're not working well. They're not working properly.
Yeah.
And, a lot of times when I'm working with a client, I'll give them a suggestion to try out a boundary just to see how it feels. And it's not a boundary that they would ever do on their own. It's almost like, try this thing and see how it feels. And does it help you? Does it make you feel closer? Does it make you feel more connected to yourself and more integrity? Does it, just observe yourself as you try on this thing that you would never probably do on your own. So it's like being open to playing around with things that are not necessarily things we would do naturally. So yes, to go back to your question, Jay, those reasons, along with sometimes just not having the language. If we didn't see anyone model how to do it well, we might have an awareness that there's a boundary, but that's why a lot of what I like to focus on my work is the practical stuff. Like, how do you do it? I don't know. What do I say, or how do I say without offending my person or my friend? And I don't expect people to copy paste, what I say, but it helps when we see someone else doing it and we have the language, it kind of sparks things in us to figure out, okay, what's a way that I can apply this and find my own version here.
And after we do that, how would we tend to our partners after we've set that boundary?
So that depends on the person. Some people don't necessarily need anything. Some people are fine. I've expressed boundaries with people, and I've seen couples that I've worked with, that their partner is capable of hearing it and they don't feel rejected. They don't feel like, they don't make it about them. They're able to just hold space that this is something my partner needs, and that's fine. So it's like paying attention to the response. If you see your partner go into shame, then that means that they likely were, perhaps maybe they didn't have boundaries as a child themselves, so they don't recognize this need or this process. And so you might not necessarily do it in that exact moment, but you can comfort them. I know it's hard. I know you're really excited about going to this event, and me saying no last minute probably really sucks. And if I was in your shoes, I would feel really, crappy too. So it's just empathizing, empathizing. That's all. It's really just, again, it's taking care of yourself, but also bringing your partner in again, and whoever it is into the equation. And I think that's where it gets tricky. It's like we often see a lot of messages with just set the boundary and then just be done. Well, that's okay with a stranger, and that's okay with you don't want to have a relationship with, or somebody that's being abusive. I don't know about you. When somebody sets a boundary with me, or something that kind of feels like an awkward conversation, I like to be approached with sensitivity and consent. Don't you guys?
For sure.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think what you're setting out here, these boundaries, like being able to come up against these uncomfortable places that we got to go, okay, this is something I've got to lay out for my partner or for my relationship with my friends and family, because I'm going to grow more from it. However, I have to take the very, very uncomfortable step to do that. And that's what makes humans these incredible beings that are progressive and able to thrive the way we have, because we're willing to do uncomfortable shit to get to the better, the other side, to get to the better evolution of whatever we could be. I think that's like what we have up on every other animal out there. We're willing to do something consciously uncomfortable. We know we're going into it and it's going to suck, but we're going to do it because we can predict enough into the future that we know that it has a likelihood of coming out better for us later. So anyone listening, maybe that can be inspiring. Like you were born a human being, so this is part of your work while you're here, is stepping into that uncomfortable gray area just to make it to the other side.
Yeah.
And even just reminding people, I think that it's okay if you do it shitty. You know? You're going to
practice.
Screw up boundaries. I don't know anybody that doesn't screw up boundaries sometimes, or come off like, I don't know if I can say the a-hole word.
Say anything.
Asshole, or come off like just in a shitty way. And there's always the repair. And that's the most important thing, that if we do make a mistake, or if we, do violate in a way that's just not at all our intention, we can always own it. I really try to do that. That was not how I pictured how it would come out, and I'm aware that the way that I just spoke my boundary was bizarre, and I'm working on it. Okay. I'm working on it too.
Yeah.
Humility.
That is the
Humility
word.
and empathy. We do have a couple questions from our followers really quick. And one of them, we call them our Magic Mob. Leslie says, I've heard you speak about the importance of taking ownership of the shitty things we did in recent conflict with our partner. Could you explain how neglecting this can create a loss of trust over time?
Can you repeat the second part of that, Jade? I just want to make sure I understood it.
Could you explain how neglecting this can create a loss of trust over time?
The neglecting the repair? Yes. Well, it's perfect weave-in from what we
Yeah.
timing of the universe. It hopes works.
Talking about the importance of taking ownership of the shitty things we did in recent conflict with our partner.
Which is just what we were just talking about, just really acknowledging, and that takes self-awareness. We have to be able, it's not the butterflies and the love and the good stuff that ruins relationships. It's the inability to take ownership, and the inability to recognize that we all have limitations. We all have deficits. We all have vulnerabilities that get in the way. And I think if we don't have an awareness of that, or if we're not willing to listen to our partner's feedback, of course we're going to lose that safety and trust.
Yes.
And so, because then we won't feel validated. We're going to constantly be spinning around in our own head and trying to make sense of things and feel completely disconnected from our partner. And over time, that just stacks up on top of each other, and the disconnection just continues to just grow and grow. This doesn't mean that every single time it has to be repaired perfectly, but there has to be a solid emphasis and effort to validate each other.
Yeah.
It's
huge. Another question from the Magic Mob. Akeem asks, where does shame start for us, and how does it weave its way through our lives after childhood?
This is a big topic. Yes. So shame is an interesting thing. Shame starts to come online. I think it's at about 1 to 2 years old. I might be wrong about the age, but it's a feeling that is the most painful for a child to experience. And it basically happens when a child starts to feel really powerful in their being, and they start to take more risky actions, and maybe they want to jump off the couch, or they want to do these things. And so the parent starts to say no. And as the parent says no, the child feels shame. Automatic, because the child doesn't have separation from parent and self. It's like one person. So when the parent says no, they feel the shame. They hunch over. You could literally see their physical being go down, and it is excruciating. So if a parent does not regulate that well for a child, in the same way that, how you said, how do you comfort someone after a boundary? You can, if they go into shame, that's an emotion that they struggle with. And so if the parent didn't do a good job of regulating that feeling for the child over and over, I know this is hard for you. Mommy doesn't like, or daddy doesn't like saying no, but I have to. This is important. And obviously not in so much words for a 1-year-old, but comforting them, holding them. Then the child gets dysregulated in their shame experience as an adult. And a lot of times when you're bringing up something to your partner, if they struggle with shame, let's say, this really hurt me, Mercedes, I did this thing, or Jade, this, yesterday when you talked over me, I felt really crappy. If the person on the other side of that receiving it struggles with shame, they might get angry because that's a defense for shame, or they might change the subject, or, basically spin everything around so they don't actually ever have to confront what you're saying, because those things are easier to do than having to deal with feeling the shame. This is a really common reason why people leave relationships. I've found that they cannot regulate this experience, which means that they oftentimes struggle with being empathic. They have trouble saying, I'm sorry. They have trouble really getting their partner's experience because they get really stuck and overwhelmed in their own experience.
Yeah, it's definitely me. I'm definitely, shame-based, and that all resonates with me.
Yeah.
And the way we can prevent that for our children is mostly through validating their feelings, right?
Yes, and finding the way that your particular child needs comfort, because every child needs different things, what soothes them, and learning. And, part of the repair for a parent and child is paying attention to those nuances and tuning into, some kids need more, some kids actually need a little bit more space, and figuring out with trial and error, but being committed to figuring that out is so important.
Yeah.
I've heard you say too, when it comes to assisting in shame regulation with our partners, it takes like 25 times of repeating this practice of empathy in order for us to pick it up and use it consistently.
Yes, that's what my therapist said. I never forgot it. I told my partner right away, I was like, all right, so we have about 23 more rounds of these to go, and I'm good. It helps to have, but it really did make a difference. That for people that are listening, I would get in a shame spiral, and I would get angry, and all these things would happen. And I was like, what the heck is going on? And so him just holding me, that was the most helpful thing. Sometimes less is more, less words, and allow that soothing and comfort in as much as you can, in small doses, whatever you can tolerate, time as you feel more and more safe in the relationship, and feel safe that, okay, if I do reach to my partner, they're going to be there. That starts to, again, create more.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever had that.
No.
It's not fun. It's not fun.
So our last question from our followers is, well, we actually had several people write in when we announced that you'd be on our show. Many of them had questions about the attachment styles that you brought up. And I know that that's a really big topic, but we were hoping that perhaps you could give us just an overview of what these attachment styles are, and why identifying which one we resonate with is helpful in our own self-growth, and in our relationships.
Yes, this is a very big topic. I'm like, how do I
I'm pretty
this
sure I'm
in?
anxiously attached. I'm pretty sure.
Oh no, you're anxious. Oh yeah, anxiously attached.
Anxiously attached, hopefully moving to securely attached.
Secure functioning. Yeah,
secure functioning. That's it.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, I love it. Attachment styles is my meat and potatoes, which I often say, it's ultimately, I'm going to try to think about the most concise way to answer this. The way that we bonded with our primary caregiver, the person that was in charge of emotionally regulating us. It could be mom, it could be dad, it could be uncle, grandmother, whoever was the main person that really had us in their care, regulating our emotions, how that relationship was, and how the caregiver responded to us when we had needs, and when we were expressing certain things that we needed. That is what creates the attachment style. So if you grew up with a caregiver that was very attuned, very responsive, not perfect, they still made mistakes, but they repaired things very quickly. They could sense, okay, that didn't work, let me try something else. Then you're more likely to develop a safer feeling experience in intimate relationships. Again, there's so much here, so I feel like I'm going to be skipping a lot, but I want to just kind of touch on what I can. If we grew up with a caregiver that was kind of in and out, sometimes they were available really well, sometimes they weren't. So it's like there was a lot of back and forth, and sometimes even in invasive ways, creates a lot of confusion and anger. And that person grows up in relationships where they're never sure if the person they're with is going to be available. So they're hypersensitive to threats. They're afraid of being abandoned, and because they've had that connection, so they yearn for it, but they often express themselves in really indirect ways, and in almost ways that ends up sabotaging the connection that they're so yearning for. And then we have people that are more dismissive avoidant, which is that's somebody that was left alone a lot as a child, neglected on an emotional level, or their parent was really invasive, so they shut down, they regulate themselves. And in intimate relationships, they're like the CEO type. They're really look confident, and they have a strong sense of self, business focus perhaps, and they don't really value intimate relationships on the surface. That's what that's what they show. That's not the truth, but that's what they show. And so they have a hard time being vulnerable, being close, responding to the needs of other people. And then you have fearful avoidant, which is a lot newer. The first two were John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, and then later Mary Main brought in the fearful avoidant, dismissive avoidant. And that usually comes from parents that have a lot of their own unresolved traumas. I work with a lot of immigrant people that have this attachment style. They had a really traumatic journey away from where they came from, and they're often dysregulated and grieving, and so they approach their children sometimes in harsh, frightening, or abusive ways. And again, it's not intentional a lot of the times, but the child both loves the parent and is deeply afraid of them. And what's interesting about the difference between avoidant and fearful is that avoidant, dismissive, doesn't really feel a lot of high anxiety in relationships, whereas the fearful avoidant does. So a lot of times people get the anxious and the fearful confused because they both feel anxiety, but it's manifested in a little bit in a different way. And this is a spectrum, you guys. We can relate to more than one.
Yeah.
Not a black and white. There's a lot of gray, which is what you guys really,
yeah.
There's gray in everything.
Yeah.
I don't know which one of those I am. So knowing which one of those you resonate with most, which I'm going to have to listen back to this interview and figure that out again. How does that help us in our own self-growth and in our relationships?
Great question. Helps so much. If I'm more anxiously attached, and having the map and understanding in the same way the boundaries maps helps us kind of like, okay, this is something I need to be more mindful of and speak up about. If I'm more anxiously attached, I kind of know that I don't really approach my partner in a direct way. I'm usually, maybe I'm sarcastic, maybe I'm, I maybe try to make them jealous to get their attention. I know that I do that. I'm onto myself. So I can bring that awareness into the repair. I can call myself out. I realized what I just did. I totally did that thing where what I really wanted to do was actually just ask you for some connection time. And I don't know how to do that. I'm still learning. I know there's things about me that might push you away. So you being able to recognize that about you then helps you validate what your partner is experiencing, so you have the ability to reconnect again. And I can't tell you how fundamental this is, because if we can't validate how our partner experiences us, that's a disconnection. And they're going to feel more and more like afraid that their experience is not being understood and cared about and empathized with. Whereas somebody, dismissive avoidant, perhaps, again, they go really internal, they shut their partners out. Them knowing that about themselves on an objective level, they can speak to that. I really suck with for your needs. When you have needs, I want to run to the hills. And that must feel like shit for you.
Right.
And I'm still working on it. This is not something I'm completely, I don't know how to do this perfectly. It feels uncomfortable to even share this with you, but I know that it's really important.
Oh, I think that's so important, so valuable, because once you do that, you just
free yourself.
Most people go, okay, yeah, I'm this thing. And then they think they're just going to sit in that. And maybe some will. Maybe some will be like, yeah, I'm, fearful avoidant, so deal with it. Maybe that's their attitude. But I think at some point we all want to be like evolving and growing. I hope that's the case. I don't know that everyone's all on the same track or speed of that. But when you can be truthful with yourself and go, I am this thing, I know I have this issue, you're going to probably take some time to look at it deeper and how to resolve it, Yeah.
So and it also sounds like no matter the style, we all just really need to own our shit.
Responsibility.
Yeah,
exactly. And I've seen so many different pairings. People ask me all the time, I'm avoidant and my partner's anxious. Can we work? I'm like, yes, if you're committed to doing the work and aware of your own default mode, absolutely. And I love what you said, Mercedes, because it's so true. We can know all this stuff about ourselves and use it as a form of righteousness,
a crutch almost,
and almost an arrogant, like, I know myself that, self-development skills. And then there's relational skills.
Yes.
I think that there is often not enough of a bridging of both of those.
Yes.
How do I take those self and now actually use it in a way where I'm connecting with you and using it as a way not to, just show that I'm self-aware and that I know all these things and I'm so conscious. But nobody gives a shit how conscious we are. If it doesn't serve them in any way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And we talk sometimes about relationship styles like wave, anchor.
We're both waves.
Yeah. So but of course we want to be anchors, right? We're all working towards that thing. But yeah, it's just like what you're saying. You can say you're a Gemini, I can't be with you. I'm a Leo. That's never going to work. Whatever, whatever the matching is. Or you're an island, I'm a wave. It's never going to work. But I would invite people listening to take on the challenge of whatever the relationship style they are and they come up against in their partners or other family members or whoever it is they're in relationship with, and their, what do we call the attachment style, relationship style, all these things that we label ourselves with. If they're not exactly in line, like you didn't find that anchor, you didn't find that other person who's in the same attachment style as you, take on the challenge. Like there are tools out there for all of this. This is kind of what this show's about. This is what your show's about, Silvy. So doesn't mean it's the end. Y'all can work through it.
It's just the beginning.
All right, Silvy, there's a few short questions we like to ask everyone who comes on the show. So first off, if you could hug your younger self right now, what would you say?
What I would say while I'm hugging her?
Yeah.
Oh, this is a deep question. I would say you are loved in spite of your mistakes.
That's really
good. How old are you when you're hugging you?
Who's holding you?
How old are you?
How old?
You think?
Probably 5 or 6.
That's good.
Yeah.
If you could have the whole world read one book, which would it be?
One book. I would say at this moment it would be Wired for Love by Stan Tatkin.
Oh, I love that
book. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of
that's a good one.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. That Your Brain on Love is one of my favorites, and it's such a short, easy read. But do you have a book for these types of relationship
attachment
styles? Do you have a book recommendation?
Book recommendation. Yes. Yeah. There's a couple. There's The Power of Attachment by Diane Poole Heller. The Power of Attachment. Yes, that's the right name. Attached by Amir Levine and Rachel Heller is a great one.
Yes.
The reason I really like The Power of Attachment, I'm still hugging myself here. I was like, oh!
Yeah, that's good.
The Power of Attachment is really great because it adds the disorganized, the fearful attached, which is not in a lot of the other ones. It's more new. So for people that identify with that would be where I would go. And then the Wired for Love by Stan Tatkin and Wired for Dating, which is the dating version of Wired for Love. If you're in the
I didn't hear that one.
And you want to really figure out, okay, who's going to be the right match, who's going to be more compatible for my kind of attachment, and it's fantastic.
How about for boundaries specifically? Do you have any book recos on that?
I do. I have Where to Draw the Line by Anne Catherine.
Ooh.
Fantastic. A lot of practical examples and different kinds of breakdowns of where boundaries can be applied for.
Fantastic.
Codependent No More by Melody Beattie helped me a lot with boundaries.
Great one.
But I'm so glad that the book you listed is a book that I have now on my shelf. So that makes me happy.
We're going to list all those in the show notes, guys.
Yeah.
All right. If you could whisper one phrase to everyone on the planet, what would it be?
Whisper one phrase. Whisker. I heard whisker.
Yeah. Well, she's a cat.
Slow down, connect, and just know that everything's going to be okay.
Presence.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
And before we let you go, where can people find you online?
So the best place would be my Instagram page. I would say where I offer, free content as daily as I can make it, and lots of lives and posts oriented around the attachment styles and boundaries topics. My website, Silvy Khoucasian, and of course, if anyone's interested in practical tools for boundaries, I also have a boundaries program. So I don't know if you want to.
That's so cool. I don't think a day goes by that I don't share one of your posts to either my stories or in a DM. So
that's what I was going to say.
You called someone your mentor. You're like, they don't know. I was like, that's you. That's you for me.
It's so true. We literally send them back and forth, I think, Jade. But yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for the work you're doing, because it is changing our lives, even just through your Instagram posts. And you really have a way of speaking about these topics that just comes across in a gentle manner, yet still impactful. Yeah. And it gets people to think. And that's a skill in itself. That is like an incredible talent. So thank you so much for all the effort you put into your work, because I know it's got to be a ton, and it's certainly made an impact on us here at the Majic Hour. So thank you for being a light, Silvy.
Yeah. And we don't get to see your beautiful face on Instagram. It's like, it's the meat of all the knowledge. And so it's so nice to see your face. You're such a goddess that's radiating when you're sharing this information. So cool to be able to witness that as well.
Thank you so much. You're so incredibly kind. And sometimes when people reach out to you for these things, that you could just feel their energy right away through a message. I just felt that from you both. And it's just so special to have that way of, communicating with people on the online world, So deeply appreciate you both. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right.
She was just a gem. Just a gem. I like her a lot. Can we hang out, Sylvie?
She was very much a really beautiful, wise crow. Yeah.
That's not your first crow.
Ruthie was a crow.
Ruthie was a crow. Yeah. I was like, yeah, Ruthie's a crow.
Yeah. They had a very similar energy, even though they're so different.
Yeah.
They both had a really similar energy at the same time.
The crow is such a strong type, you know, like it's the like between.
It's like a messenger almost.
Yeah. Between the spiritual world and the real world.
Like, isn't it known for, I don't want to mix in Game of Thrones here, but isn't it like almost like they have a third eye, you know?
Yeah, that's actually, I think, where they probably get that from, that spirit animal. But I know it has some similarities with cat, so I don't like that. I'm trying not to.
Yeah, they're like
as a bridge, but
yeah.
The crow though has some, like, people kind of think of it as more, as far as what I read, because my mom was thinking she was one, remember, and then Ruthie was one, so we were reading about it. But I want to say it's something like it has a mystical or like magical ability to.
Yeah, what I remember is they were kind of like a messenger from the spiritual world, but like kind of like in and out of the spiritual world.
There was something about it when I was reading it, and I don't know how to articulate it, but it gave me the sense that people sometimes fear the crow's ability because it's like magic, quote unquote magic, you know, something that they can't understand. So they of course fear anything they can't understand, but they are
awesome. They're feared, but they're heavily misunderstood. Yeah.
Interesting. I love that stuff. I like when you tell us which one you saw when you have the energy to read it, because it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I never know if it's fitting to bring up in the interview, but then as soon as I'm like,
you're like, guess what? He was an owl.
Funny. I
know. Speaking of which, my cat's meowing in the background. She'll probably give us a couple sounds. She's like, did you rang?
That's funny.
Sylvie might be able to tell us our attachment styles, but we could tell her, you could tell her her spirit animal, and I'll translate it by reading the book.
Yeah, that's a good idea. You should memorize what they all mean, and I'll recognize them, and then you.
It's a good program. We got a system down.
All right. So my magic trick is actually,
besides that,
still related. It's really simple, but this is just, so she already talked about ways to set boundaries, but this is just 5 specific things you can say during conflict. And I save this to my phone, so like whenever she posted it, but it's been a while. So these are 5 things you can say during conflict that I really liked. 1, could you express that differently? I feel like that's non-threatening, and it's just
good. Yeah.
Yeah. And then could you bring your tone down a bit so I can stay present? The fact that you're saying so I can stay present.
That's it.
So good.
So good.
And then I really need my perspective validated before I can continue. That's a firm one, but it's really good. And
if you can say it with the emotionally sober tone, I think you can get really
yeah. Let's please take a time out and just hold hands for a few moments. I really like that one.
That's so you right there.
That's so me. I have never had a partner that would say yes to that, by the way.
Have you asked a lot?
I have. Yeah. And I've also brought up later after we've made up that I wish that they would have been open to that.
Damn, because I'm trying to picture, sorry to bust up your magic trick in the middle of it, but I'm trying to picture getting the courage and vulnerability, mustered up to say that in the middle of a heated argument.
Imagine saying it and then getting pushed away.
That's what I'm saying.
That's what I mean.
That part. Yeah, to get the balls to do it, and then to someone to tell you, nah, it would be like,
no, don't come near me.
Enraging. So I guess that's why we're afraid to say some of these things, is because what if we get denied when we had mustered all this courage and vulnerability?
It never made me, I never got fear from it. And I'm excited for my next partnership, because I know that it'll be the one
going to be able to that.
Yeah.
I could already feel it.
And then the last one is, I need to take a little break. I'm going to come back to you in 30 minutes. I think it's so important that you say in 30 minutes, because otherwise it can come off as such a egoic, you're being punished. But the fact that you say, I'm going to come back to you in 30 minutes, it gives them the idea of, okay, I have 30 minutes to cool myself down too. You know?
And because we're both waves and we're thinking of it from a wave perspective, when you're in that relationships,
you're not choosing to act like an island. Yeah.
Well, you think the island that you're with, which I know we've had a lot of experience there, is saying, I'm taking off and I'm not going to deal with this now or probably ever. So if you at least
worst.
Yeah, if they made a commitment, I'll come back in 30 minutes, that would be huge for them.
Oh my God. I take all my anxiety away.
Yeah. I'd feel so glad and proud to be with them, just because.
Me too.
So that's a boundary in itself. Setting that time.
But I do think it's important to say in 30 minutes, and not, even if you're setting a time limit, that you don't say tomorrow. Like even that is like, that would drive me up the wall. So those are the 5 things that you can say during conflict. So I also wanted to just bring up that she also, after conflict, after things have been solved, she brought up apologies. And I just wanted to use a few examples. So she said, an apology is not, I'm sorry you feel that way. It's, I'm so sorry I hurt you. Because it's something we often say, I'm so sorry you feel that way. That's not validating them as much as I'm so sorry I hurt you. You're
Because
taking
they
ownership.
heard what, their hurt was, and
Mhm.
you're admitting to that you were a part of it.
And then an apology is not, that was not my intention. An apology is, I will be more mindful of this in the future.
Oh, that's good. Chris
Really
says that to
good.
me a lot, almost to a point where I'm like, are you just reading this out of
I
me?
say it a lot
Out of this
too.
argument, but that's because my wave self is sick
Yeah.
of the island thing again.
I've been saying it. I will be more mindful of this in the future, but I mean it.
Yeah.
And then an apology is not, maybe you're upset because this is one of your triggers. Ooh, that would trigger me.
Wait, maybe you're upset because this is one of my, what is it?
One of your triggers.
One of your triggers. Oh, that would trigger me. Yeah.
An apology is, I know you were sensitive about this and I screwed up. It's the way
That
they
almost comes off at first.
I
And
know.
then you're like, you butter it up at the end. So you're like, I know this is something you're sensitive about, like it's all your fault, but then you're like,
No, but I think that they're being sensitive to your needs when they say that. I know that you're sensitive about this and I screwed up.
yeah,
Like,
when they say the I screwed up part, you're like, okay, wait. You're like, wait, I hate you. Wait, I love you.
yeah.
Confused.
And then the last one, an apology is not, you were making a big deal out of nothing. An apology is, I'm sorry. Can you help me understand why this hurts?
That's
a
good.
one. Yeah. She's
You don't even have to say the I'm sorry part first. Just wanting to understand why it hurts is the, like I don't even like hearing I'm
Can
sorry.
you help me understand why this hurts?
Like that almost pisses me off because I feel like women, we hear that so much. I'm sorry. And then no change happens. Nothing.
It doesn't piss me off, but it doesn't do much for me. I'll say that. But the other stuff.
Better than nothing, I guess.
Yeah. All right. So try those out.
Sorry, we're a couple of goofballs, but it gets late on these podcast recordings. We get delirious.
Next time I'm in a partnership and we are in a fight, I'm definitely going to ask to hold hands and see what.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I gotta use that. I gotta use it. Give it to me one more time.
Let's please take a time out and just hold hands for a few moments.
Oh, I
So
can't
it's
wait
not
to get in a fight
talking.
now.
It's not talking. Just hold hands because the power of touch.
Yeah, right. No.
The power of allowing yourselves to connect again.
It's intimate.
Be in each other's presence without speaking, where you can both calm down. Think about how great that is.
I love it.
Yeah. Whew, all right. So what's yours?
You know what? I'm delirious because I woke up at, like, I texted you earlier at the before dawn, and I had this crazy dream, which I'm not going to get into now, but because it'll take a whole podcast. But man, it took me 4 hours, Jade, to journal it. I journaled for 4 hours. So like from 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. or something crazy ridiculous. It's a serious one.
And
okay.
I woke up to a snake at my door.
And that's a whole nother story. Let's get into that sometime too. That is an interesting
one day. All right.
All right. So my magic trick is, it actually comes from Dr. Lauren Fogel Mercy on Instagram. And she says, she says, it's okay to let the phone call go to voicemail and call back later. And it's okay to turn your cell on do not disturb. It's okay to not respond to every text message immediately. It's okay to check emails less frequently. And it's okay to take a break from social media. So these are all, in line with what we're talking about with Silvy today regarding boundaries. So you can set your own boundaries and you don't have to have.
I did some of these things today.
You did?
I turned on my do not disturb on my text.
How'd it feel? Scary at first?
They started Facebook messaging me.
Oh God, there got to be a better system to that.
No, yeah. I mean, these all are amazing. The trouble with us, I think, is that so much of our line of work is on social media and on our phones. And so there's this sense of urgency stays because it's how we pay our bills.
Just being I think being in a line of work that I want to call it like an independent contractor, someone who has to basically go where the money is when it's there. Like do it now or it won't be there later type of thing. It's not like a 9-to-5 or a salaried position or something like this. So yes, it does already put, an extra anxiety on you as to make sure you're available now. It's, what's the definition of luck is the intersection of opportunity and preparedness, right? So that's kind of the idea. Nobody's getting lucky in this entertainment industry. It's just a matter of being prepared and ready for that opportunity when it shows up. So I get it. Yeah, we are anxious about answering calls and emails and text messages, and
I don't like it.
But I think that there is a way to schedule it into your day. Like even Chris last night was telling me, hey, I think I'm going to start scheduling like a 15-minute block a day where I just get to like do whatever I want on social media and then the alarm goes off. So I got that done. Like, okay, that piece is done. And then I can go on and do what I have to do.
I used to tell myself I could only be on, doesn't mean I'm going to spend the whole hour, but I can only be on from 10 to 11 a.m. and like 4 to 5 p.m. Those were my 2 hours that I could be on social. That's when I got my business post done. That's when I checked my favorite accounts, whatever. I was not allowed on the rest of the day. And I did that. I did it for like a whole year, and
it worked.
it was very nice.
Very nice.
Yeah.
I find myself just going there. I'm like, why am I in here? You know?
Exactly.
And I heard Eric Godsey actually the other day say to move the app like every 3 days, because in about 3 days you get the muscle memory back. So move it again. You know, you don't even have to move it far, but it just, every time you're searching for it, you remind yourself, why am I going to this app? I
That's
don't
good.
need to go here, because it's
Yeah.
all about that.
I asked myself that today. That's good. I am going to start doing that.
Yeah.
All right, Magic Mobbers, thank you so much for tuning in and taking this journey with us. If this episode held some magic for you, please share it with your friends and family. This would mean so much to us. And don't forget to join us on our Instagram page at The Magic Hour and let us know what your favorite episodes have been so far. We appreciate all your feedback and want to know what is lighting you up.
Hey guys, so you can catch us again next week or go listen to some of our past episodes in our podcast library right now. We'll meet you there. Until then,
Be a light.